Just a few days ago, Pastor Chris Okafor, the popular Lagos-based cleric, shared what many people would normally celebrate as good news: an engagement video, a new chapter, a man moving on with his life. But almost immediately, that announcement collided with something nobody expected. A video surfaced online, very raw and emotional, and also deeply unsettling, featuring Nollywood actress Doris Ogala. And in that video, she wasn't congratulating anyone, neither was she wishing Pastor Okafor well. Instead, she was saying something very different. Over and over again, Doris insisted that this marriage would not work. It would never happen. That Pastor Chris Okafor would not get married. And this wasn't said calmly. Her voice was shaking, her words were scattered, her emotions were clearly overwhelming her. At some point, it stopped sounding like anger and started sounding like pain, real pain, the kind that doesn't come from a single incident, but from something that has been building for years. She accused him of destroying her life. She referenced a miscarriage. She spoke about naked videos being shared. She repeatedly asked one question that stood out more than anything else: who are you leaving me for? This wasn't a carefully planned accusation. This was a woman that was unraveling in pain and in real time, and that is why many people paused. Because if this were just online ranting, it would have followed a familiar pattern: insults, accusations, clout, and then silence. But this doesn't feel like that. It felt very intense. It felt like a woman who was very desperate, and for some people watching, it felt disturbing. The repetition alone was alarming. The insistence that the marriage would never happen. The way she spoke, as though she was reliving something traumatic rather than reacting to a new event. Very quickly, the conversation online split in both sides. Some people dismissed it as bitterness, as an angry woman reacting to an ex moving on. But when you even think of that, this man is a pastor, so how can he be her ex? Others laughed it off as Nollywood drama, but a growing number of people became genuinely concerned. Because this doesn't look like someone who is chasing attention. It looks like someone who hasn't healed. And that engagement video, as simple as it was, seemed to reopen wounds that had never really closed. What the public was witnessing wasn't just a reaction to an engagement. It was the surface of a much deeper story, one involving alleged relationships, pregnancies, miscarriages, money, power denial, and years of unresolved conflict. This moment, this engagement announcement, and Doris Ogala's emotional response to it was not just the beginning of the story, it was the breaking point. So yes, the chances are you've already heard this story. You've probably seen the clips on blogs. You've read the headlines. You've heard people reduce it to an angry woman or another pastor's scandal. But that is not what we're doing here today. This is not just retelling what you already know. This is a deeper look, not only into Doris Ogala and what she claims happened to her, but into the man at the center of the storm and the history that trails him. Because when you take away all the noise and the emotions and the viral moments, a bigger question remains. Is this just a single woman making wild accusations, or is this another chapter in a much bigger story? To answer that, we have to go beyond this engagement and the chaos that followed it. We have to go back to years, long before this video, long before Doris Ogala spoke out, to examine past controversies, past denials, and how they compare with the accusations being made today. This is the journey we're about to take. Almost as soon as Doris Ogala's video went viral, the conversation online exploded. People reacted in shock, in disbelief, and in anger, and some even in amusement. But behind the screens and the headlines, there was something far more serious happening. Those closest to Doris began to notice changes, subtle at first, then more alarming. Friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances could see that she was not just angry or bitter, she was emotionally unstable. Her repeated insistence that Pastor Chris Okafor would not get married, the rawness in her voice, the exhaustion in her eyes, it all painted a picture of someone struggling to cope. Reports soon started to surface. People around were very worried about her. Some tried to reach out, others feared that her distress might have escalated, and unfortunately, those fears were not unfounded. Among the most alarming developments is the news that Doris Ogala allegedly attempted to end things. You know what we mean? End things. While we won't go into the private details, the seriousness of this cannot be overstated. This was no longer a story about gossip or an ex's anger. This was a mental health emergency, a real and urgent human crisis playing out in public view. It was at this moment that concerned individuals stepped in. They visited her, spoke to her, and tried to guide her through the storm of emotions that had overwhelmed her. Their presence was crucial, not just to offer support, but to prevent something irreversible from happening. At the center of all this chaos, at the heart of what we are witnessing, is a man named Chris Okafor. A lot of people might not know who he is, and just as many might not know the woman at the center of the storm, Doris Ogala. So before we go any further, it's time to take a step back and introduce these two people properly, however briefly. Let's take a closer look at who they are, where they come from, and how their paths crossed. Doris Ogala is a Nollywood actress and public figure. She has built a name for herself in the industry, not just for her roles on screen, but also for being outspoken and unafraid to voice her opinions. Over the years, she has occasionally been at the center of controversies, sharing personal stories that often spark conversations and a lot of debate online. Chris Okafor is a Lagos-based pastor, the general overseer of Mountain of Liberation and Miracles Ministry, an influential voice in Nigeria's religious landscape. His ministry, Liberation City, has grown significantly over the years, earning him both followers who see him as a prophetic leader and critics who question some of the controversies surrounding him. Even his past is in the public eye. He was previously married to Besem Okafor, and together they have 4 children. His life, like his ministry, has been highly visible. Every major controversy or public dispute has been discussed wildly online. So yes, when you hear their names, you know there is history, you know their stories, and you also know that their connection did not start with that engagement video. To really understand why Doris Ogala's recent video shocked everyone, we need to go back all the way back to 2017, when her story with Pastor Chris Okafor allegedly began. According to Doris, she first met Chris Okafor in the year 2017. He was already a divorced pastor with 4 children. Doris knew this. She knew he had a past, but somehow they were drawn to each other. What started as a connection slowly turned into something more, and before long, Doris said they were in a relationship. She became a huge part of his life, his circle, even met his children and other relatives. Everything she did, she says, was in the context of a serious relationship, and during this time, she claims Pastor Chris promised to marry her. While their relationship was going on, the love was real, according to her at the time. So in the midst of this relationship and all the lovey-dovey, Doris became pregnant. The pregnancy, however, ended in a miscarriage, leaving deep emotional and psychological scars that she continues to carry. She describes the impact as life-changing, the kind of pain that leaves a permanent mark. Feeling that Chris was not serious about committing to her in marriage, Doris made the difficult decision to marry someone else. But the story doesn't end there. She claims that after some time, Chris convinced her to leave her husband and return to him. Trusting him again, she followed through, only to be used and abandoned, amplifying her feelings of betrayal. During, their period of the renewed relationship, Doris fell pregnant a second time, and tragically, this pregnancy also ended in a miscarriage. The repeated losses, she claims, added layers of grief and frustration that have stayed with her for years. Just to put it in here, after Doris had that miscarriage, Pastor Chris Okafor, when their issues came and they both went their separate ways, blamed her, accused her of an abortion, and circulated videos of the miscarriage, while she was having the miscarriage, which he claimed was an abortion. He circulated videos of it. A lot of people saw it. So these are claims by Doris. I didn't see the video, I don't know, but this was what she claimed. And I think there was a screenshot of some part of the video, which I saw. But despite all this, there were obvious denials from the pastor. So to substantiate her claims, Doris released WhatsApp chats and communication records showing the depth of their interactions and the fact that their relationship existed despite Pastor Chris's public denials. These events taken together paints a picture of a relationship that Doris describes as emotionally damaging, full of unkept promises, and marked by repeated heartbreak. For her, this is the story behind the anger and intensity seen in her recent viral videos. For the fact that she was convinced to leave her husband and return back to him, I think is enough reason for her to be acting the way she's acting now. But let's move forward. The story took an even darker turn when Doris Ogala revealed another layer of her experience with Pastor Chris Okafor, one that involved money, arrest, and legal battles. According to Doris, Pastor Chris Okafor asked her to assist a prophet, one of the prophets, his name was not mentioned, in a sensitive investigation involving a missing child. Acting on professional advice from her lawyers, she gathered evidence that she claims cleared the prophet's name. How she did that, I'm left wondering, but there are no details about that. But in appreciation, the prophet allegedly promised her 35 million naira. However, Doris claims that the money was sent through Pastor Chris Okafor, who only gave her 20 million naira, withholding the remaining 15 million. Efforts to recover this balance reportedly escalated quickly. Doris alleges that as she pursued the money, she faced harassment, including arrest, timed painfully around her younger brother's burial. She spent 3 days in detention before being transferred to Abuja, an experience she describes as both humiliating and traumatic. This ordeal didn't stop there. Doris was also reportedly embroiled in a criminal defamation case because Chris Okafor publicly denied ever knowing her. In response, Doris has claimed she has photos, videos, and chat records proving not only that their relationship existed, but also that she was allegedly blackmailed by the pastor at some point. Pastor Chris has denied ever knowing Doris, calling all her claims false. But when you start looking at his past, you notice his name has been involved in several controversies over the years, stories that raise eyebrows and invite questions. So now, let's take a closer look at some of these controversies. By examining them, we can draw parallels, make comparisons, and see if there is any element of truth in Doris Ogala's accusations. This won't be decisive, but it will give us a hint, a pattern that might help make sense of what is happening right now. When we start looking at Pastor Chris Okafor's history, it becomes clear that the name has not been without its storms. Over the years, multiple controversies have trailed him, some serious, some highly publicized, and some that left people asking whether there is a pattern behind these allegations. Now let's start looking at these allegations one after the other, some of them not all. Now fast forward to 2014. The pastor's former wife came forward with accusations that shocked many. She alleged that he mistreated her during their marriage, and the situation escalated to public maltreatment. According to reports, she eventually walked out of the marriage in 2012, leaving her 4 children behind. This decision raised questions. Does a woman just walk away from a peaceful marriage, leaving her children behind? It doesn't make sense. During this period anyway, she continued visiting her children, even though Pastor Chris allegedly prevented her from seeing them for 9 months. When she finally came to visit after that period, it reportedly led to public beatings. While the full reason behind her departure remained unclear, the circumstances highlight a complex and possibly strained relationship, something that is worth noting as we examine patterns in Pastor Chris's life and his personal interactions. Few years after that, another controversy erupted. This involved a landed property belonging to one Mrs. Dorothy Ibano, a church member of Pastor Chris's church. Pastor Chris was accused of controversially taking over the property from her. In response, Pastor Chris denied this. He said that the woman gave the land freely. You know, these things we see that people come and sow, that is apparently what the woman did. But then one of the woman's children, one of them living in Switzerland, contested these claims. It was like, how can my mother just give you out her land in the name of sowing? But then by the time all this was going on, it was already late. By that point, the church had already erected a structure in the said land and all that. The story anyway added to the growing list of controversies surrounding him. Now we fast forward to 2020. A Cameroonian woman came forward and another story emerged. This time, the Cameroonian woman shared that she had been invited to one of Pastor Chris's program where she was allegedly hypnotized or manipulated, which of them. According to her own account, this led to a situation where she was, forced upon. We already know what that means. The sex in itself was non-consensual. She also claimed during the program in Cameroon that a lot of people lost their money, lost their cars, all in this same pattern of they sold it, but he left with all that stuff and went for another program. These were accusations and claims, never really proven, so we can't just say they actually happened. It was more of a give and you receive kind of scheme. Her story, while long and complex, added another layer to the controversies surrounding him. Most of this controversy and accusations I am summarizing. Most of them are long and lengthy. If you're interested in any of them, you could go check them out online. They are publicly available out there. Now, in the same year, 2020, Pastor Chris was implicated in what became widely known as the miracle scam. A woman with a bent or missing arm was allegedly used by multiple pastors, including Pastor Chris, to stage miraculous healings. During the event, her arm appeared to be restored, convincing audience of divine intervention. But investigations later revealed that the miracles were staged and the woman's arm could be bent to appear missing, or she could stretch it so that you would see she has a long arm. I don't know how she did it, but whatever the case, she made it appear as though it was the prayers that the pastors were rendering that made the arm to become stretched. So by and large, this was busted because like 5 pastors had already used her already, and the video circulated online and it became a very huge scandal. This miracle scam became one of the most talked about controversies in his ministry. Now let's move to another controversy. There were whispers in the past and claims of a staged kidnapping, allegedly orchestrated by Pastor Chris himself. While details remain murky, the story suggested that the act was meant to manipulate followers or attract media attention, further adding to the narrative that his ministry has been involved in questionable practices. Through all these events, dating from 2013 through to 2020, one thing remains consistent. Pastor Chris Okafor has denied every single allegation, whether the one of forcing himself on women, domestic disputes, property takeovers, staged miracles, or staged kidnappings. His stance has always been firm. These are coordinated attempts by individuals and groups to bring him down. And yet, when we take a closer look at this history, patterns begin to emerge. Maybe, just maybe, they give us a little more insight into Doris Ogala's accusations and why they have captured so much attention. While nothing here proves her claims, examining these past controversies allows us to weigh her story against the backdrop of previous allegations and ask the questions many viewers are already thinking. Could there be an element of truth in her claims? At the center of the story, beyond the storms of accusation and controversies, there is a new woman who has entered the narrative. She's involved with Pastor Chris Okafor, a man with a long and complicated history. Let's pause for a moment and consider what that means. Here's a man who is 55 years old, previously married, father to 4 children, and whose name has been embroiled in multiple public allegations over the years. And yet, someone has chosen to step into his life. This raises questions that are not meant to judge, but just to understand what convinces someone, a young lady, to move forward in a relationship like this. Is it love, faith, hope for reassurance, a belief in change, or something else entirely? What weighs on a person's mind when they choose to enter a relationship with someone whose life is so public, and not just so public, but very, very complicated, filled with controversies? How did they reconcile the knowledge of these past controversies with the desire to build a connection in the present? At this point, there are no clear answers, only reflections. Only the questions remain, inviting the audience to think critically about human choices, emotions, and the intricate dynamics of relationships built under the weight of public scrutiny. At the end of the story, we also have Doris Ogala, a woman who has publicly declared that this marriage is not going to hold. We feel for her. Her pain is real, raw, and very visible. She has endured what many would consider multiple blows, being used, feeling abandoned, and seeing her personal struggles played out in public. is not just a story of heartbreak, it's a story of shattered trust, dashed hopes, and the fear that no one will ever truly want her again because of her past. Yet, even as we sympathize with her, there are questions that naturally arise, questions meant not to shame her but to reflect on human choices and responsibility. When she first met Pastor Chris Okafor, he was already a divorced man with 4 children. What convinced her at such a young age to step into a situation like that? Then, after leaving him, Doris married another man. That marriage, according to her, faced minor issues, and she was again convinced to leave. Why didn't she try to make that marriage work? Why allow someone, a man who has already shown no intentions of committing to her, to guide her decisions in such a life-altering way? These are questions about patterns of choices, about how multiple blows can compound and affect a person's judgment. When she reconnected with Pastor Chris, she became pregnant again, only to experience heartbreak once more. Now older, without a child, possibly without a partner, and with her past fully visible to the public, her pain is undeniable. But again, we have to ask, why allow yourself to be deceived a second time? Why engage in a relationship with a pastor, a man who stands on the pulpit preaching every day without questioning the morality and implications of your actions? It's important to clarify, these questions are not meant to make her feel worse. Her emotions are real and her suffering is valid, but there's also a level of personal accountability. Could she have realistically expected marriage if she gave herself freely without conditions, allowing the man to continuously take without reciprocating? There's an old saying, why buy the cow if you have the milk for free? In this context, the principle seems to apply. Now, as Pastor Chris moves forward with a younger woman, Doris is left grappling with loss, regret, and public scrutiny. And while we feel for her, we also reflect. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the choices we make, even when the consequences are painful. So people, here we have it. That's just about all we have for you today. We've seen the story of Doris, all the chaos, controversies, the entire mess. But I'll leave you with one question. Do you think there's an element of truth in Doris's accusations based on the pastor's previous history? Or do you think this is all one big lie? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like if you've watched this video so far, leave a comment about what you think, and subscribe to this channel for more deeper insights into cases like this.